Have you ever wondered what the lore of Heaven Hill might sound like, taste like, and experience? Well, welcome to the ultimate Heaven Hill lore episode, coming to you live from what Rickhouse?
H1.
H1. So big shout out to the Heaven Hill team. Bourbon Lore is here with Heaven Hill, having an amazing experience. And we have some special guests here with Clay and I that I'm incredibly honored and proud to be sitting with. We also have a pretty extraordinary lineup, if you can't tell, sitting behind these two legends. But before we get into the lore behind Heaven Hill and some extraordinary expressions from the Heaven Hill lineup, and yes, some pre-fire dusties that all of us out there as enthusiasts couldn't be more excited to see here right now today. Not sure we're gonna sample all of them, but we're gonna get started and see what we can do. Mind sharing a few words, Mr. Conor O'Driscoll?
So Conor O'Driscoll, Heaven Hill's Master Distiller. Welcome to Bardstown. Welcome to Warehouse H1. It's one of our newer houses, but it's right here on campus. 55,700 barrels of fine American whiskey aging. Smells good in here.
Beautiful. Yeah. God bless. And Mr. Seth Weinberg, you want to share a few words about yourself?
Happy to be here with the Bourbon Lore team, but also here at the Heaven Hill Distillery, one of their many properties. This space that we're sitting in is a fairly new building, but the grounds that it's on top of have a ton of history. And I love the history of American whiskey, of bourbon, America's national spirit. So it's really exciting that we get to look at the current state of American whiskey while also relating it to the history that it's brought to the state of Kentucky and to the nation, and so much joy and happiness. And we're looking forward to diving into some of the history and drink a little bit of whiskey.
Amen. Coming in, with the best head of hair out of the group.
Hey, we all have great hair. Everyone is different. Just some have more of it. Yeah.
Clay rising.
Yeah. No. Look. I mean, where else could you talk about the history of American whiskey in such depth and with such joy? I mean, the passion that you find at a place like Heaven Hill. Coming from Conor, from the team here, from just being at this historic site this is once in a lifetime.
Amen. So today we are going to share with you some behind the scenes facts, some never told stories, and experience some of these pre-fire Heaven Hill bad boys, or at least a few of them here. And Seth, I have to say, before we kick off, I first met you at Bourbon Bonanza, and we had the opportunity to kind of get to know one another. And then the lore moment that we had was standing in line together for a pre-prohibition cocktail. You wanted to share a few moments or a few thoughts on what happened in that line with that pre-prohibition cocktail that you were putting together?
Yeah, so that was a really once in a lifetime experience, and part of what the Bourbon Lore team puts together. We were at this great charity event with some great whiskey producers and whiskey enthusiasts. And we put together a really, really esoteric blend of really old, ancient artifact bottles of liquor that we opened up and drank them all. And a few of them, we didn't just try them, which is kind of the common thing with whiskey tastings, especially old vintage bottles. You just get to try the whiskeys in their natural state. We actually took some of those whiskeys and some of those old liquors and put them together and made historic cocktails with them. Wow. And to find some of those bottles, you might not ever be able to find those again, but on top of that, you'll never probably make a cocktail with them again. So one of those once in a lifetime experiences.
Some of the bitters, how old was some of the bitters that was even there?
Yeah, I mean, late 1800s, early 1900s on some of these bottles. I mean, just our generations before us, made those, and now we're getting to drink
And people
them.
don't think that those things change because the names don't change, but the recipes that go into them and the people that make them change. They're really, really artifacts.
Absolutely.
I shared
That's
that
awesome.
There was a connection immediately that was made around the history, the lore, and then this unique community and moment of the experience of coming together. So I think that brings us right here to today and what we're doing with what you've brought here, Seth. So you want to share a few words with some of these little surprises that you just brought out?
Absolutely. So knowing that we were coming here, there's so much history with the property, but also with the brands that Heaven Hill currently sells. and owns. Some of the brands are household names, I think. Obviously, bourbon history, you can't talk about bourbon history without talking about a gentleman and a brand like Elijah Craig or Evan Williams, really, some of the forefathers, godfathers of the classic American spirit. So we have some of those old bottles here, and then also some of the brands that maybe aren't household names and a few things that are no longer around. Some of these brands have lived on for decades or centuries, but sometimes they fall by the wayside, but they were here and they were a part of the history in Kentucky at some point. So, this is, to the naked eye, just a classic bottle of Evan Williams, or as many people call it, Evan Williams Black Label, right? The iconic square bottle, the sour mash whiskey. But if you look closely, there's a few differences in this. It's a bar leader, but this was actually bottled in 2001. And back then, when they were bottling this Evan Williams whiskey, they used an age statement. And the way I look at it, age statements aren't a good or bad thing. They just define a whiskey, and that's a minimum age statement. So there could be whiskeys in there at a little bit older age. But if you don't have an age statement on a whiskey, it gives the master distiller a lot of flexibility to create a consistent product, which is something really important, I think, with a product like Evan Williams, which so many people enjoy across the country. So this one is slightly different than what you're getting on the shelf today. The other big factor with this, which is part of the history of Heaven Hill, and one of the sad parts, was there was a huge fire here in 1996 that is well known in the bourbon community now, and you guys talk about it as part of your history because good or bad, it's part of the history. And that's very uncommon in the modern era. Maybe one of the few times there's been a catastrophic event at any distillery, but there's been other collapses and tornadoes and acts of God that we can't control, right? Other than that, though, if you go back to the 1800s in the early history of American distilling, distillery fires were very common. Unfortunately, if you read through some of the history of American whiskey, it's really, really sad because so many distilleries, had open flames and there weren't modern fire suppression systems, things like that. So it was just one of those things. You pick up the pieces, you rebuild, and you start making whiskey again. Right. And we're so fortunate that you guys were able to do that just a couple decades ago. And so I thought we'd start off by opening one of these bottles of pre-fire distilled Evan Williams whiskey, because the really special thing about this is when we talk about vintage whiskey, I really like to tell people you're drinking history. And part of that history is that history can't be recreated exactly the same again, because now there's a new master distiller and he puts his special touches on whiskey. There's new rick houses where the whiskey's aged, the trees are slightly different, the weather patterns have changed, and there's new buildings and just so many factors. When you add it all up, there's a lot of science that goes into making whiskey, correct? Right. But I always like to say there's a lot of not science that goes into making whiskey. Some of these environmental factors, some of the special things that happen inside a barrel.
The technical term is black magic.
Okay, black magic. Black magic is I think there's a little black magic in this bottle all around us, and so we're very fortunate to be able to taste that history and just enjoy what happened here 2 or 3 decades ago, as well as enjoy what's being done here today.
Of course, the single biggest change from that to the modern Evan Williams is that was, like you said, pre-fire. So the distillery that was 500 yards that way that burned down in November '96, we make Evan Williams at the Bernheim distillery now. So same mash bill, same yeast, different distillery. Right.
And we're basically at the pretty close to the center
the fire
of that,
started
of that
maybe
conflagration.
500 feet behind us.
Oh, thank you.
Warehouse was struck by lightning, ultimately spread to 7 more warehouses, 100,000 barrels, the distillery.
And it was so hot that rivers of metal, right?
Yeah, so it melted the blacktop, set the road on fire, set the river on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, made water burn.
But no injuries. No one was
injured. No one lost their job. Max Shapiro, then president, now executive chair, got the team together, said, everyone still has a job. We'll find something for you to do.
Yeah. The other thing that I really like about that story is that other distilleries pitched in to help.
I mean, think about that. So Brown-Forman, Jim Beam, bunches of distillers called the next day and said, what can we do to help? I mean, you've had this catastrophic event. You, our competitor that we fight tooth and nail to beat in the market, have had this catastrophic event. What can we do to help to get you back in business? You think if Ford or GM had that, you think how they would respond.
say,
but and we talked earlier how when Brown-Forman hired me in 2004, most of the whiskey we were making was for Heaven Hill. So Brown-Forman would not have had to hire me if it wasn't for Heaven Hill. So that's how I got in the bourbon industry. So so here's to Heaven Hill.
Heaven Hill, Shapira's,
Sláinte,
the legacy.
And the Dusty Whiskey.
And
Thank you, Seth.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
Thank you for sharing.
And these glasses are special as well.
Absolutely. You know, there's so much that goes behind the history of whiskey above just a bottle of whiskey. The marketing, the ad campaigns, everything that was done in a different way, in a different era. And so I really like the full experience, the Bourbon Lore experience, if you will, where every attention to detail is brought in. And so we brought in these vintage kind of deco 1970s Heaven Hill glasses. They have the old family crest on there. If you look at the back of the glass, these are low ball glasses. So this was kind of a common thing. You would have these at your house. If you drank a few bottles of Heaven Hill whiskey, you could send away for these. Usually that was kind of a big thing back then, is we want to get our glassware in your hands at your house. And so this is an old school low ball glass, and there's a couple measurements on there for either a mild, a regular, or a rich pour, depending on how much you pour in here.
I'm kind of a rich pour guy.
I'm a rich pour guy. I started us with a mild pour because we have a couple whiskeys to taste through, and you know,
it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
So how do we think this compares to current Evan Williams? The same, only different?
I would say exactly that.
Yeah.
I would say it absolutely is Evan Williams, but there are characteristics, details. To me, there's a little bit more honey. There's a little bit more of that rich sweetness. It's just different.
Yeah.
You know,
it's got. You're right. It's got rich sweetness is perfect, way up front, and then it fades to that spice note.
Yeah. No, it's really nice.
Yeah.
So this has been in a bottle just over 20 years. The bottle's in great shape. There's no evaporation or anything like that. Once whiskey goes into a bottle, they say it doesn't change. All the magic, all the black magic happens inside of a barrel. Right. What's happened inside that bottle in the last 20 years that might have changed this whiskey a little bit?
I mean, I heard you open it. I mean, the cap cracked open, so it hadn't leaked. I mean, if it's airtight, essentially it's not like wine. Okay. It's because it's so high proof that there's no additional maturation. But wine is 10, 12, 14% alcohol, and there's more stuff happening there. But you're right, everything has happened in the barrel, so it tastes on proof, and it shouldn't have changed.
And what is the proof on this one?
This should be 90 proof.
90 proof. Yeah.
Yep, 45, 90 proof.
So when I sip on this, I have some
dialed
unique,
in.
Memories that kind of flash back, and I think about just some of my experiences in growing up in the Southwest. And I actually honestly just had this flashback of being at a campsite with my grandpa, and his old, we called it Old Blue, which was his old Silverado, his work truck. But he'd always have something sitting around camp, on one of those old Coleman tables. And I just right now, honestly, I just had this little flashback of going back to just a different place, And I think that's what's cool about sometimes opening up or cracking some of these. It's just considered dusty today, right? Where it brings back different memories, different eras, and just different chapters of your journey, and you got to get to relive it. Exactly.
This is really fun.
Good.
It's very drinkable, but also very complex. It's got a lot of character.
It's delicious.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Heaven Hill whiskey.
Yeah. Well, but I like what you said too. That it meets you up front with some sweetness, and then the spice comes in. It doesn't hit you.
Yeah.
It just sort of walks in the door a little bit and sticks around. And to me, that's what I like to drink in a bourbon.
And the more it opens up, especially on the nose, just the better it gets.
I think part of what we love about Heaven Hill is the fact that there's a level of heritage and legacy, that they're continuing to tell the story of where Heaven Hill has been, where it's at today, and obviously where you're taking it in this next chapter of its journey. And you have unique characters like some of these expressions up here that have navigated a lot of chapters on behalf of the Heaven Hill family and fans like ourselves out there for decades.
And of course, Evan Williams was a real guy.
Right.
Had a distillery in downtown Louisville. He was Kentucky's first distiller, the first one to have a legal license to distill. But we honor that of the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience to this day.
Yeah.
So,
which is, I will say, it's such a fun place to visit. Like, it's not just a, I mean, it's one of those sites. It's not just a tourist spot. It's also a working distillery.
Right.
And you can get whiskey from there.
Jody and his team.
It's phenomenal. It's very cool.
Yeah,
it's very.
It's kind of like, talk about bookends. So the Bernheim distillery where I work, 1,500 barrels a day. Jody and his team make 1 barrel a day. And it's just like, wait, how can one company kind of encompass both?
Yeah.
But it's
but they do a good job.
They really
But
do.
it's Jody. He's been here longer than you have, and
Jody has been with the company for 42 years. He was on site the day of the fire.
Is that right?
And he's got some great stories, but he talks about how he was working in the warehouse. They evacuated. He remember his truck was down the hill, so he goes running down the hill and gets in his truck as he's kind of dodging exploding barrels. He's like, maybe this wasn't the best idea, but he did rescue the truck. It was a Chevy. I think some of the plastic melted a little, but yeah.
Seth, you've brought, obviously love this. This is an element of what Bourbon Lore is about, being able to experience an older expression, a unique expression, and obviously a unique moment and place, such as sitting here in H1 with some incredible people. You also have some complimentary items here that you've brought. You want to share a little bit about what's down here as well?
This is an old advertising piece from Heaven Hill, and Heaven Hill didn't advertise as much as some of the other big brands and companies. So you don't see as many of the advertising pieces. I really, really enjoyed this one, partly because it's vibrant color. It really stands out. I was crossing the street over there across from the distillery experience, and I think a few cars tried to stop because this almost looked like a stop sign. But this was a piece that would have been in a retail location or a liquor store, really talking about what was important in the era. This sign dates to the late 1960s to early 1970s, when a bottle of whiskey, the average bottle of whiskey on the shelf was about $4.90, which sounds like a great deal.
I'm actually glad you brought this out, considering inflation still is, Connor. We'd actually have a conversation.
We are doing our part. We're doing our part. You can't buy a pour for $4.90.
Certainly not Heaven Hill.
That'd be great, but in a Rickhouse in Bourbon Country, I thought this also
that's a great
would
piece.
add a lot of color. And
I think Max Shapiro has that in his office. Somebody at headquarters has that sign. I think it might be Max.
a few, but this is original old cardboard piece, and not too many of these would survive. Once
That's pretty neat.
Once they get torn off the wall, they're usually just discarded.
Yeah.
But you can tell this was actually hung up. The old frame marks are on there, and the sign still comes from Bardstown, Kentucky. If you look at the bottom, there's kind of the trademark information there. So this is a authentic piece of Heaven Hill history.
I love it, Seth. Thank you for bringing that, sharing that. Seth, there's a variety of people that are going to probably see this and think to themselves, either they're just getting into American whiskey, maybe they've been in for a little while. You've obviously been an aficionado, a connoisseur, and really have become quite the historian within American whiskey. You're based out of Nashville. Any words of wisdom for somebody that wants to experience, learn, and start to grow as a fan in the American whiskey world, both as an enthusiast as well as maybe as a collector?
Absolutely. So, the market for whiskey, as we all know, has just increased every year for the last few decades, and has become such a part of our culture again. There was a few decades there where Americans' palate for great American whiskey had changed, and we were into clear spirits and sweet cocktails, and now I think as a community we've become we've refined our palates back to the standards that the good stuff. Yeah. And so the big thing with whiskey is community, And so the Bourbon Lore experience, I think, really exemplifies what I got into the business for and why I've really enjoyed it over the years. Is you meet so many great people. So I really encourage people, number one, to educate yourselves. And you guys are about having a great time, but also providing information and history and experiences. And all those things together are going to make you appreciate the craft and the hobby and all the passion that goes into making whiskey in the same facet. So, whenever I travel, I don't take a real vacation. I'm always, if I'm in a state, I'm going to the new distillery that's opened up. I'm going to the old historic distillery. I want to see this stuff. I want to touch it. So they've built a great experience here at Heaven Hill in Bardstown and in Louisville. So really, that's the first piece of the puzzle: is go and touch these places, experience them for yourselves. But if you get to do it on a Bourbon Lore experience, I mean, you're really going to take a deep dive and really get to do special things like drink some of these old bottles where we're talking about the history as it relates to what's going on today. So that's the first key is get out there, enjoy the experience, see the countryside, and meet people, because what makes this whiskey taste better is drinking it with friends, drinking it with strangers, and enjoying it as a group and getting to discuss what we like about it, what we're excited about. There's so much innovation these days, so many brands. It's really hard, I think, to somebody just getting into the whiskey business. So I really like to take the history of these whiskey bottles and relate them to why this stuff is so special today.
So speaking of that, before we wrap, because Conor has a whole group that's coming in here to do a barrel selection, and we're really grateful for the opportunity to be able to be here in H1, and you've got some great stuff sitting here on this barrel. You want to just kind of give us a highlight with what you have sitting behind here, and then maybe we can do a quiz here with Conor and see if he has as many of the facts dialed in.
Sure. I think one brand or bottle that I want to talk about is Henry McKenna. I believe
He's an Irishman.
Conor likes the brand. He was an Irish immigrant distiller, and this brand might have the most history, or some of the most history of any brand on this table. This was around well before Prohibition. I think one of my favorite tidbits or facts about Henry McKenna, the brand that a lot of people probably don't know. I'd be curious if you remember this from your Heaven Hill boot camp days. After Prohibition, this brand survived. Some of the Prohibition era whiskey had been bottled, in concentration warehouses, and brands kind of were bought and sold after Prohibition was repealed in 1933. So this company kind of had to reinvent itself, the Henry McKenna brand, and its new owners right after Prohibition actually hired a gentleman named Julian Van Winkle. You might know him as Pappy, to be their vice president of sales. And he was working with another company, but agreed to take on that project and really helped launch the Henry McKenna brand back to where it is today, which I think one of the most delicious small batch whiskeys on the market, or sorry, single barrel whiskeys. The very smallest batch. This is a bottle where the label looks a little bit different, but the bottle shape is the same. There were just some kind of unique touches: the felt label, a brass hang tag featuring the Bottled in Bond logo. But this bottle still carries a 10-year age statement, just like it did back then. And for the MSRP, I think one of the best values in American whiskey today. So it's really cool. This is kind of the same as the Evan Williams. We call this a Dusty. This was distilled in 2001, but bottled probably 2011. So kind of in the same vein. The bottle looks a little different today, but still great whiskey, just from a decade before. I think one of the other whiskeys that I brought that's probably the most unique on this table, and probably a brand that you've never seen or heard of, because I've only seen a few of these bottles.
I've never even heard of that one. Yeah.
This is a brand called Old Picket, and it is no longer. It's the one whiskey on this barrel table where there's no longer in production. So this is what we'd call a private stock brand or private label brand. So this was produced by Heaven Hill Distillery. If you look at the back here, bottled and bond under U.S. government supervision, distilled and bottled by Heaven Hill Distilleries in Bardstown, Kentucky, DSP, Kentucky 31, which is where we're sitting right now. And this has the bottled and bond tax strip. So back until the mid 80s, you would have government tax strips that sealed bottles. The Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, that was really the first Consumer Protection Act where we said, hey, we want to make sure quality whiskey is going into a bottle that you can drink. And it predates the Pure Food and Drug Act, or what we now know as the FDA, by almost a decade, where we really cared about the quality of our whiskey more than the quality of our food.
Crazy, isn't it?
So this was distilled in the spring of 1972 and bottled in the fall of 1976 as a true bottled and bond whiskey. But this brand was made for a chain of drugstores that were originally based out of Louisville by Thomas Pickett Taylor. And this brand started in 1897 is when he opened his first drugstore in Louisville. By the 80s, he had about 44 drugstores, and they had finally sold this brand of drugstores to a company you might have heard of called Rite Aid. But
That was Taylor Drug, right?
Taylor Drug.
Right.
So in that century that they operated, for quite a few years, they had their own line of liquors, bourbon being one of them, and this great bottled and bond bourbon. And that was when liquor stores and drug stores were a little bit more of the same.
You know why? You know why CVS and Walgreens and Taylor Drug carry liquor is because of the Bottled and Bond Act. It was the only one of the very few medicines that was available. So you could get a prescription for medicine. So you would go to the CVS, you go to the Taylor Drug with your prescription, and they would fill it with a pint of whiskey. So that's why whiskey is available. Yeah, how about that?
Absolutely.
Doctor's orders.
Yeah, purely medicinal.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So this bottle is true lore. I mean, this might be one of one surviving. I never say that because one will always pop up after we film this video segment, because now this bottle's famous. But a true piece of history.
I think Seth brought this here because he wants to come to the next Bourbon Lore Experience and is going to bring this as a guest and share it with our other guests.
Absolutely. So.
But we make it to drink it, right?
Somebody kept this in their medicine cabinet a little too long. Luckily, it's in our hands today. I think we know what to do with it, and maybe we'll use this for a future Bourbon Lore Experience.
Seth Weinberg, absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. These have been some real treats.
Just phenomenal.
On behalf of the Bourbon Lore team, thank you, Heaven Hill. We're here because we couldn't be more excited to be able to launch the first Bourbon Lore Experience in Kentucky. That's going to be taking place this October. We're curating an incredible program that is a one-of-one that Kentucky has never seen, and we are blessed to be able to have the opportunity to team up and do it with the Heaven Hill family. So on behalf of Bourbon Lore, thank you, Heaven Hill. And thank you, Kentucky, for this incredible opportunity to be here this weekend. Conor, we're in your house, so any final words or wisdom that you would like to share?
On behalf of Heaven Hill, thank you, Bourbon Lore. Thank you, Seth. This is a super treat to see these things. It's great to see to be part of the legacy that goes back so far. But excited with this partnership, this friendship. We got great things to come.
Thank you, brother. Cheers. Salute. Cheers, Heaven Hill and the Bourbon Lore.